From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
We're at the tipping point where you're seeing a lot of manufacturers actually realize the importance of having that risk mitigation in place with 3D printing because of what's happened. But they don't feel too secure about, hey, which technology do I pick? How much do I have to invest in this? What sort of infrastructure do I have to have? How is this really going to be a business plan? And so those two things, the education side of it, I see is ramping up in the last 9 months. And then, just getting people involved and working with an open communication. That's been the different side of things. I've seen a lot of people communicate in this industry that weren't communicating before the pandemic.
That was Penna from All Digital Additive Manufacturing. Since 2015, he has been focused on additive manufacturing consulting sales, marketing strategy, customer experience, and exploring technologies like laser powder bed fusion. He spent a number of years at EOS, helping them build a regional brand, managing channel partners, and developing an inside sales team. Adam now has a video podcast where he connects with people that pique his interest in and around 3D printing and additive manufacturing, continuing the conversation by promoting positive people and applications behind the AM events while sharing educational knowledge together, layer by layer. He joins the show today to talk about his thoughts on how COVID-19 has impacted the AM industry and what trends dictated by the pandemic will extend beyond 2020. Well, Adam, welcome to the show. For our audience, why don't we just start with a little bit of background?
Yeah. Thank you. Great to be here, Mike. It's wild being on the other side of these interviews, and I guess a little bit of background. I've been in manufacturing for close to the last 20 years. Started out on the design side, in engineering, working with CAD, and in the late 90s and mid 90s, I guess I should say I started. But just getting involved in design in general and the manufacturing industry on the mechanical side, mechanical engineering. And that parlayed into looking into metrology. I spent close to a decade in metrology, working for Faro Technologies, and then went on to work for Creaform, working in portable metrology for a few years there. And just more experienced in the engineer side of design, but then also looking into actually what you do with all of the data, the point cloud data, for a long time. And that's where I first saw 3D printers, getting into point clouds and working with different vendors and being out on the road as a salesperson, because I started out in engineering, but then slowly got involved in sales only because I saw a lot of interesting things happening over there. And I was like, oh, those guys are making some good money. Let me see what I could do. But it was also a natural progression. I was working a lot in support and working with customers. And the next thing I know, I was just, solving what they were doing to set up their measuring instrument. And that was with CAD and walking them through CAD. And next thing I know, I'm like, hey, you might need this kind of probe to do that because you don't want to, mark up a surface or stuff like that. So I started selling accessories. Next thing I know, I was in sales. And it was a wild ride in sales. I did a lot of good stuff with that. And that's where I ended up at EOS after completing my master's degree. Was later in life, So after completing that, I ended up at EOS and worked there for the last 5 years. And it was a wild ride. Obviously, the last 5 years have been very, very, there's a lot of growth in our industry. So there's been a lot of things happening. Those 5 years felt like 10 years, but looking at production, looking at what it is to take things to production. And a lot of it's still prototype, but it's at that tipping point now where you're seeing all the applications come out that are more suited for the production side of it. So it's been wild, but that's kind of a nutshell what's been going on with me. And it ended me up here in this position right now talking to you.
And so over that time, as you started with metrology and getting into 3D printing, and certainly on the sales side, what were some of the observations that you kind of took from the metrology side into 3D printing? Was it a different way of selling people or talking to them about the technology?
Yeah. Good question. The whole thing kind of popped up in my career, as far as I actually saw in the 90s, everything happening with 3D Systems and, Stratasys. And, back then there was the Z Corp that was happening out in the industry. And those were kind of where I first started to see the 3D printers. I was working with point cloud data, and when you capture all that data, you have to do something with it. A lot of it's used for inspection and reverse engineering. So those were the two big kind of solutions that I actually worked with all the customers. And in doing that, when you're collecting a lot of the point cloud data, it obviously can be turned into surfaces, and those surfaces are STLs, and those STLs are then put inside of a printer to print. And so I spent a lot of time working with those people on the road, actually working in tandem of, okay, we're going to collect this point cloud data, but then we could actually come up with your surface data and be able to print this out for you. And it's more, and we're seeing that in the industry, right? It's the ecosystem, cradle to grave, what happens before and what happens after, so that was the beginning of that. I started to see 3D printers out there and people using them in the prototype industry and in the design field. I worked with a lot of automotive companies that were in the early stages of working with, the clay models, right? And they're forming a clay model to be a body surface. So let's go ahead and scan that and take a look at deviation analysis and get into, hey, what can you do differently? Iterations, quicker iterations than working with the clay and molding the clay each time. So that was, there's so many different applications that just started to sprout up because of point cloud data and because of actual portable metrology. Metrology was fixed for a long time. And then it all of a sudden became portable in the late 80s, early 90s. And next thing you know, all of this data had to be used for something, and it was ripe for 3D printing. So that kind of is where that led me into this field.
Yeah. And I'm excited for the conversation today. So we were talking a little bit off air about kind of what do we want to talk about. We've had a few conversations over the last few weeks, and kind of as people are aware from your background, we're getting towards the end of 2020. Yeah. And kind of you've had kind of some new things you've started up, the podcast. We start there. Kind of what's it been like as a fellow podcaster, getting that going and getting it off the ground? What was the inspiration?
Yeah. I guess the inspiration is the mouth. I like to talk. If you haven't noticed, but no, it all kind of came about organically. Early in the year, I was part of the COVID cuts. After a wonderful tenure over at EOS. Wonderful company, spent a lot of great time doing a lot of great projects with people, and have nothing but respect for the Longer family. They do a great job, and it's wonderful to see what they're doing. But what happened, and it happened to a lot of people, so I'm not alone. But that, that kind of put me in a spot where I didn't know what was next. This has been a very scary time with obviously the pandemic and the uncertainty of what's next. And I just was talking to a lot of colleagues that also lost their job, and pointing them in the right direction of things for continuing education, webinars, staying on top of the industry. And I created a calendar, and I started sharing that with people. Next thing I know, I was talking to people about what's coming up next. Somebody shared a video, and I had a few more calls about doing another video. And there it was off and running. And, after a while, I started converting all that into audio podcasts. But it was unplanned, but at the same time, very organically has been growing over this 9 months that it's been so far. And it's been great getting to network with people, especially because we're all in a very different state right now as far as emotional state. People are trying to stay healthy and be involved, be engaged, network. And there's a lot of great stories to be told. There's a lot of great people in this industry. So it's not hard on that side of it. It's just that it's exciting for me. And I think that shows every time I get together with people to do a podcast, because I am very interested. I love what we're doing, and I love to see how we're helping the actual, the industry and the world in a lot of ways evolve. Things are evolving, and 3D printing plays a really big part in making things better. So I like to focus on that. And, that's what I brought into each one of the podcasts.
And one of the big things that I found challenging, I'd done a podcast a number of years ago, but
yeah, you were
obviously
saying.
technology has changed, but you have to get reacquainted with microphones, video, how do you record, how do you edit? And that's been the conversation in some ways is the easy part. It's the, getting all
Yeah,
the
it's
back
everything
end.
after. And how many things I've messed up. I even had a little blooper this morning because I've switched computers, have Zoom on two computers, had it set up one way and different on another, didn't realize it. And so sometimes things don't record the way you want. You have to deal with what you get. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, all those little things you don't think about. It's easy talking. It's a whole nother world when you're getting into actually editing and video production and working with making it sound decent and look decent for people. So yeah, it's been a great challenge, a good challenge, a good problem to have. You know, when you're working on making things and improving yourself at the same time. So it's been fun.
Have you seen any trends or patterns in the conversations that you've had over the last few months?
Yeah, you know that is the truth. As far as patterns and trends, everything or a lot of topics seem to stem around same two things that I keep saying is the education side of it, you know, and the security. You know, people are wanting to feel secure in many ways, you know, with what's going on with the pandemic, with procedures, but also, I mean, we've had the same issues over and over for years in the industry with intellectual property and people opening up what they're doing on the machines and sharing you know, data and languages and you know, making people feel comfortable doing that. There's been a lot of good partnerships to make that comfortable and make security and education a forefront of what's happening in our industry, because we're at the tipping point where you're seeing a lot of, you know, manufacturers actually realize the importance of having that risk mitigation in place with 3D printing because of what's happened. But they don't feel too secure about, hey, which technology do I pick? You know, how much do I have to invest in this? What sort of infrastructure do I have to have? How is this really going to be a business plan? You know, and so those two things, the education side of it, I see as ramping up in the last 9 months. And then, you know, just getting people involved and working with an open communication. You know, that's been the different side of things. I've seen a lot of people communicate in this industry that weren't communicating before the pandemic. So that allows for the growth of the industry. We talk about industrialization, right? And you see all the mature advanced manufacturing that's out there, it's already been industrialized. There's things that are standards that are in place. There's a way it flows and everybody's used to it. I want to make this, I get this machine, you know. We're not quite there, but we're getting there. And those applications are starting to be sussed out by individual companies. And if they're not doing it, this pandemic has put them in the mode of, hey, let's check our inventory. Let's see what parts we can turn over to 3D printing, at least have that backup available or the knowledge of how we could do it. So it's been an evolution, a fast evolution over the last 9 months, but I think it's very important and it's been exciting. So I'm glad to keep listening and keep learning. You know, it's great.
Yeah, and one of the things I've observed, or I'm trying to reframe kind of what my thesis is around the additive manufacturing market, because there's kind of two stories that are really kind of in my mind I'm trying to flesh out. You have the one end, the company's learning, kind of getting inundated with what are my options, like, okay, can we go from FDM for prototyping to something else, maybe in production? But then after 25 years of the industry being around, there are a cohort of companies, it's not huge, that are pretty advanced. And
Yep.
that's where a lot of the case studies are coming from. And you get kind of some of the buzzwords coming up and what they're actually doing, which is some really cool stuff. But there's a big chasm between those. It's like and how, with a lot of the industry pushing forward more advanced stuff, are we leaving behind kind of like the folks that aren't already inundated with the technology and don't live and breathe it on a day-to-day basis? So I'm trying to think through that. It's been something that's been weighing on my mind, because I've been in my fair share of facilities and small, medium-sized companies, and like when you talk about 3D printing, it's not there are still a lot of hurdles to overcome, and people and technology wise.
No, it's the truth. I think you know, it might be in our face every day, but as far as the average manufacturer out there, it is a pretty new thing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's you know, it's something that's disrupting the normal supply chains, everything else out there. At the same time, you know, it's important. It's important to be involved in something that actually gives you a few more choices. You know, you look at customization. You look at what's happening even in the medical industry with point of care. I mean, my gosh, how much can be done at that point? It's really just scraping the surface of what can be done there. So there's just so many things. I hear a lot of on-demand, manufacturing, and that's where we'd like to see it. Hey, the big dream was I push a button, it gets printed, right? There's a lot more that goes into it besides that, and you being a material scientist obviously know that, materials are a big part of it. Being able to have a design that actually works inside of the whole, system, not only when you're printing it, but what's happening before and where it's going afterwards. There's a lot of thought that goes into that ecosystem, you could say, of making a positive business case and the right solution for the right application. So, we're kind of in the wild, wild west as far as that goes. Everybody's finding applications. Everybody's working on what is real and what's not, the affordability, the amount that you can produce, larger machines, faster build times, it's all kind of pushing forward, but there is still a lot to be done. And there's a lot of communication, a lot of talks that need to be had, and they're being had right now. So that is the positive side of it.
Where do you think kind of the education falls into that conversation, both kind of in the industry, or like the manufacturing industry as a whole, but also kind of those leading into potentially getting into the field?
Yeah, I've been privy to a couple recent conversations, even with the Rochester Institute of Technology. I had a podcast with them that'll be coming out shortly, but also, working with the University of Dayton, and then working with, even local groups like Girl Scouts. I mean, the Girl Scouts are doing great things with education and 3D printing. I was actually part of a badge that the Girl Scouts had here in Central Texas for helping hands, and that was Enable, which is a company that makes prosthetics. And then the Girl Scouts put together all of these and actually delivered them to the patients. So very interesting things going on in education in the young, the youth of our, of our world. My daughter is 11 years old, and in her first grade class, she had a 3D printer. I didn't see one of those until I was in my 20s. So I mean, it's really neat to see the acceleration of education on all sides of it. But again, I think when you're dealing with different companies and different manufacturers, educating those people, the decision makers in the industry, is, I think, and I've had some conversations even recently with locals, with not local software companies, but global software companies that have that same issue. How do we break through? The people that aren't on LinkedIn, the people that are making decisions need to be educated somehow. And, there's a lot of different groups, consulting groups that can go out there and do that. But it's picking up speed. Education is huge. Now you've been seeing programs inside of universities for specifically additive manufacturing. We're just starting to see those graduates come out into the world, so there's a lot to happen inside of education that hasn't happened yet. It's in the midst of happening. We're going to see the next generation coming up that's had this stuff since kindergarten, since first grade, and it's exciting because it's nice to mentor those people. I've had a lot of great conversations, continue to do that. And just being able to be open and share the information. I think that's a big important thing. It goes back to our security and education topic, but yeah, that's a really good one. Getting involved with STEM, STEM education is huge. I see a lot of the women in 3D printing are working with Maker Girl actually on curriculum that's going to be coming forward in 2021 for teachers. So that's a big thing. Teachers are out there and they're working on their own curriculums that are usually given to them. So to add an extra element of something that has to do with manufacturing, it's not being done everywhere. So you need the outside help. You need all the organizations that are actually coming up with curriculums that can work and that can be tested, improved, and accelerate that inside of education. So it's exciting, but there's a lot of work to be done. It's a good train to drive on because there's a lot happening and there's a lot of places to help out. So if you're not involved and a lot, it's a wonderful thing to get involved with.
From your experience on the sales side, selling machines and equipment and materials, what was the education like for your potential customers? Were you dealing with mostly people who weren't familiar with it or had read an article, or kind of where did that conversation typically start?
Yeah. So, the big thing there was, the sales that I was doing is in the metal AM side. So, metal AM really in the last 5 years has started to come into the reality of what can be done. It was initially way too expensive and way too hard for most people. And a lot of people didn't even know it exists, still might not know it exists out there. So the sales side of it, is a big part of education. What I did see when I was out there was the fact that, people have their things in mind that they want to do, that we're looking for something. So they're interested in a printer because they have a specific thing they're coming up against, and they might, have an attribute inside of 3D printing that works best for their solution, but they don't know how. They know they can get customization. Then they don't know, hey, this might cost more if you do it this way. So there's the education that's going on with the engineers over the last 5 years, of what can be done, if this is the right part to do it with. Why are you actually looking into purchase a machine, or do you really need a service before you purchase a machine? It's a big investment, right? There's a big investment, especially when you're looking into production machines. And so there's a bit of education that has to go on, and that usually happens inside of your service centers. The people that are out there, the contract manufacturers that can show a solution that's already existing and show how they're having a success with it. So it's marrying those two together, letting people see the successful case studies, but also understanding what their particular business case is and why it's important to them. There's a lot of education that goes on there.
How much I'm always curious with kind of this question, how much of the sales process is kind of top down versus bottom up for this sort of equipment, where you may have some engineers or already a printing facility that has polymers or lower cost non-metal systems? Does it start there and kind of lead up, or does it kind of end up coming from the...
Yeah, and just like any 3D print, it depends on the situation, right? I mean, really, I see both sides of it, but the key is to educate the decision makers to actually have the business plan in effect before you go to them. A lot of the engineers are excited and they think it's cool and neat and they can do some different things with it, but there really isn't a business case for the company to purchase yet. So you get to a certain spot with an engineering team and it's great, and they see the effect of what they can do with a machine, but then they don't have maybe the budget ready for it. So you have to look at what's coming up, and that goes into convincing that next level, of what's happening out there. And depending upon where a company is, sometimes it's not the best thing for them to do to purchase outright a machine or a solution. So they go again to those contract manufacturers. But having that ecosystem of partners that are doing that you could introduce them to and guide them along the way of their journey and make sure what they're doing is appropriate, and it just doesn't, sit on the back shelf somewhere and get moved on to some other process. That's the big thing, the follow-ups, the callbacks, the working together with somebody and finding out what's the business plan, what's actually going on here. That happens on all sides. It happens from the bottom up and it happens from the top down. And it's a big challenge, especially when you're working, with educating the C-suite and making them buy into what's going on, because obviously you want to have a solution that works. And,
right.
And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I had a recent conversation with Juan Mario Gomez from Exact Metal, and he made a really interesting point that about risk for certainly some of these bigger metal machines, where a failed build is $5,000-$6,000 out the door, and risk translates everywhere from, hey, if I'm a small medium and I'm spending $1 million, $1.5 million on a machine, like that's betting a significant portion of this year, the next year's company future on that, and the access to the machine or the risk tolerance to find those new applications or kind of really engage with a broader application set can be somewhat limited if you with budget for some companies.
Yeah. Obviously, budget's the bottom line again. Money do you have to spend? You see the bigger companies doing this. They've jumped in, the Siemens of the world, the Jabills. The big companies that are actually doing the large scale production, looking into how to have the multiple machines. And that's the dream, right? To have this distributed manufacturing where it's available everywhere in every country and every locality. And it's growing, it's getting there. The idea is there, the things are in place, the technology is there as it's growing, but handling all of the data that's in between is also a big challenge. And it's easier for the large companies, and that's why I brought it up. But some of the smaller companies, it's not so easy. And that's where, again, that having the right partner, having the right education, walking through it, and building that business plan give you that ROI you're looking for. It all comes down to your inventory, right? You have parts in your inventory. Are these parts, some of them are better suited for 3D printing than others? How do you know? Ask the experts. Get out there, talk to multiple vendors, find out what part of your inventory can be used for 3D printing and why. There's certain things that shouldn't be changed and should never be put in a 3D printer, but there's plenty of people that want you to go ahead and 3D print this, and they don't know it has no cost benefit of doing that. So it's that not making somebody feel foolish, but actually going through and looking at inventory with a professional that can be, kind of the consultant walking you through, hey, let's look at why these particular items inside of your inventory might be better suited for 3D printed than the rest of them, and how we could improve them and show you that ROI and value inside of those. So it's a challenge, but it's possible, and it's happening across the board, and it's happening more and more.
And given kind of the circumstances of 2020, everyone's kind of homebound for the most part. I mean, manufacturing's kind of is a critical piece of infrastructure, so that's continuing. How have you seen specifically the additive manufacturing ecosystem change? There's no big conferences, and there's certainly been changes across communication. But in your perspective, what have you seen change?
Yeah, when I think ecosystem, I of course, started the machine and what the machines did 5 years ago compared to what they do now. Some of the machines, even the operating systems they were running on were antiquated operating systems. So, when you look at, hey, what is that whole ecosystem and how has it grown over the last 5 years? Those things have changed. People are starting to look at the more open architecture and where that's good and where that's bad. Because a lot of people have been screaming for open architecture for a lot of years, and there's places where that is good. It's mostly in the R&D sensibility, but when you get into production, you do want to lock down your processes, because you have to get those processes qualified and certified and everything else, especially in aerospace and automotive and medical, as we know. So there's a lot of different things that need to happen. Where I see the ecosystem changing is, software partners are starting to work together with the machines. People are starting to open up their IP. They're starting to look at different ways that they could actually have support on all levels. And it comes down to the data, what's happening with the data? How are we sharing data? How is it that whole, they call it the, digital thread, the digital value chain? But it's real, and there's that ecosystem of support is growing around that, what's happening from cradle to grave with this part, and what do we need other than this printer? Because it's not only the printer, as you know, there's a lot of pre and post processing steps that go along with it. And that's where that ecosystem of support needs to grow. And it has been growing over the last 5 years. The big companies out there, the EOS, the SLM, the GEs, the HPs, everyone is looking at how they can support that ecosystem. And I see that is growing on the pre and post processing side. So software and machine tools being integrated with 3D printing. And it's only getting better. There's a lot of great partnerships that just started up even over this last 9 months that are accelerating that whole ecosystem. So looking forward to so much more.
You think that has changed the equipment manufacturers' approach in finding new customers, expanding their customer base? It's hard to go to a trade show like IMTS or Formnext and in this ecosystem. Have you seen any changes in marketing, or even how you think about interacting with potential users in the space?
Yeah, that's always the challenge. And that's pretty much the question I get from most people is, how do we find the next user? How do we find the next industry, the next application? And again, that goes back into education and security, right? You have to have a database. And I see a lot of the OEMs doing this, a database to educate people out there, not only to purchase the machine, but that whole, what you actually have to be looking at other than the machine. So, the right people are changing that, growing education, growing training. But yeah, it's different in the virtual world. It's been a challenge for all of us. We're all not able to be face to face, to do the handshakes, to actually go over to the machine and to work things out. It can be done, but there's a lot more of a lot less of it being done because of the current climate. So those challenges are being overcome with processes. I talked to companies that are put in processes of allowing people in their building and what that looks like. But again, we're still having to deal with this virtual world. So what can you do? What can you do? You could show a lot of what's happening via computer, via your prompter, your screen, or whatever you have to show these things. But it's still, you need the hands-on at some point, and so I guess we're all hoping and looking forward to that day when it can get back to, I think it's going to be an integrated future. We have the hands-on and then we have the virtual world, and people are more comfortable with it now. So we're going to be taking advantage of both as we go forward. That's the hope, at least. I think a lot of things have been changing at the end of the year. We have this vaccine that's out now. We have a lot more processes in place that mitigate risks. And so as we go forward, I think you're going to see a lot more of the two of those working together, in-person, hands-on, and also virtual, integrated together. And we're seeing that even at the conferences we're seeing out there. AMA just announced next year that they'll be having that in Orlando, Florida. And that's my old hometown there. So it's going to be great to see that there. But everyone's wondering what that's really going to look like, right? All these trade shows, what are they really going to look like? So a lot of it's still going to be the integrated virtual world with being there in person. And here we go. It's a new year coming up, so we'll have to see how that plays out.
And so, speaking of that, kind of what are you excited about, kind of both personally and professionally, with kind of the podcast growing? What's kind of on your docket for the next year?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the next year is interesting. A lot of great conversations with companies right now. Of course, still working both part-time, but also looking for a full-time position with a company right now. There's a lot of great things to do. I mean, there's so much out there. The companies are growing. People are moving in different directions. People are settling at different companies. Back to the drawing board, basically. It's a new year. We're going to see what happens. I'm going to be continuing what I'm doing with talking to the industry and picking up the community as much as I can, because there are so many great stories, to tell. But I think that comfort of the virtual world is a big deal going forward, and how we actually integrate that into our daily lives in a new and better way. I mean, there's more things that are coming out that actually, make the experience better for all. But that brings up another good point. There's the augmented reality side of it. That I think we see a lot more of that happening. The VR, the augmented reality, the AI, artificial intelligence. That is really being pushed hard because people need it now, right? It was like kind of slowly coming into the world and coming into our industry, very slowly trickling in. But that's speeding up at a fast pace. So I think coming into the next year, we're going to really be looking at a lot more of that stuff as we go forward, especially on the augmented reality side. I think that helps a lot on all aspects of understanding and learning and seeing and touching and feeling. So, it's a new year. It's exciting. I think we have a lot that we learned this year. Networking has been really huge, and just continuing that forward. And, we do have an industry that is growing, is exciting, and it's just on that tipping point of actually being fully industrialized. So we just keep riding the wave,
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing you in Orlando, hopefully. And
Yes, we could see each other. It's funny because I'm wondering, we're going to see people and I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were 2 foot tall, or oh my God, you're 8 foot, because it's like, it's so
50
different.
pounds of muscle over the.
Yeah, you're all muscle. Yeah, it's like you never know. I was thinking about that because a couple people that I saw that I thought were one way or another, a different way, and it's like, it's interesting. So we have all that to look forward to. Oh, that's you. Oh yeah, that's me. So great things are about to happen, are happening in our industry. You just have to actually get out there and talk to people, network. And like I was saying, if you're a company looking to get into 3D printing, really talk to the people out there who are actually looking at inventories and can actually kind of find out what is useful in your particular business. because just shooting against the wall everything that you want to 3D print isn't the right way to go about it. It's better to kind of work from let's go to the professionals and ask them what would work, and then kind of focus on those particular parts in our inventory. I think that's really special, and there's a lot more of that happening. So we'll see a lot more products coming up this next year.
And as we wrap up, do you want to give a shout out to your podcast? Where can people find it? What do you talk about?
Sure. Wow. Yeah. It's called All Digital Additive Manufacturing, and it's just an acronym of Atom. Hey, imagine that. But yeah, no, it's basically an online media podcast that can be found on LinkedIn. I'm on YouTube, Apple, all your favorite podcast networks. Just look for All Digital Additive Manufacturing with Adam J. Penna, and that would be me. So thanks for letting me pop that in there. That's awesome, Mike. It's been great talking. I look forward to doing more with you. There's a lot more to be done. So it's great to make these connections and make things happen.
For sure. And we'll throw all the links up when we post this. So thanks for your time today. Have a good holiday season, and we'll talk to you at AMUG, hopefully.
Yep. Happy holidays and happy 2021. We'll hopefully see you soon, buddy.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.